What's up, friends? It's Haley Hines, aka Bird, and you are tuning in to the Give 'em the Bird podcast. This podcast is all about challenging what it means to be healthy and fit. It's about celebrating sustainable behavior change and non-scale victories. And most importantly, it's about giving the bird to the diet industry and societal expectations of body size. Why? Well, because at the end of the day, you have an entire life to live that does not require your body look a certain way. Thanks for tuning in. Now let's give 'em the bird. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Give 'em the Bird. I am so pumped to have you here. In today's episode, I sit down with Samantha Osterhaus, who's a registered dietitian and certified intuitive eating counselor. You'll hear in the beginning how it's so serendipitous that Sam and I connected because we both graduated with a degree in health and human physiology from the University of Iowa 1 year apart. And if you're from the University of Iowa, you know that it's a small world. And the health promotion department in general is even smaller. So it's been so cool that her and I could connect in that way. In this episode, Sam and I talk about how her definition of healthy and fit has changed throughout the years, both as it relates to her personal well-being, but also as it relates to her ideas around nutrition and her approaches around nutrition. We also talk about what her philosophy behind nutrition is, which is to keep it simple. And we dive into what that means and how we can actually apply it to our own lives. Sam and I also talk a little bit about how we can manage chronic conditions without dieting and restricting, which this was something I was super interested in learning about because I am definitely not an expert when it comes to managing chronic conditions. And when I've worked in positions in the past where that was more of my role, we definitely take like your typical textbook definition of managing them, which a lot of times leads to cutting back on calories or restricting certain foods out of our diet. So it was super interesting to hear how she manages to work with patients and clients in that way without having them diet and restrict. I enjoyed talking with Sam so freaking much, and as you'll hear at the end of the episode, we talk about how she's got to come back on. That's how much I enjoyed meeting with her. I hope you guys enjoy it just as much, so let's dive on in. Samantha Osterhaus is a registered dietitian and certified intuitive eating counselor who helps clients improve their relationship with food and their bodies while managing chronic conditions such as diabetes, thyroid disorders, and PCOS. Sam's approach to nutrition is all about honoring your body's needs and focusing on what we can add to support our health rather than subtract. She is passionate about keeping wellness simple, making food fun again, and pepperoni pizza. Welcome, Sam.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yes, so excited to connect with you. Like we were just talking about before we started recording, I just think it's so cool that we both went to the University of Iowa and graduated a year apart. I just think that's small world, you know? So
serendipitous for us to connect now on Instagram.
I know. I was trying to remember before we got on the Zoom call, I was like, how did I find you? Like, I don't know if you popped up in my Explore tab or if, you know, somebody I know shared something that you posted. I just don't even know how it happened. And then come to find out you like were from the same area. I'm like, wow, this is really weird.
Very small world.
It is so small. University of Iowa just is a small world, I feel like, yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Just the Midwest in general.
That's what it is. It's the Midwest, yeah. So, I'm super pumped to have you on and to talk about, you know, intuitive eating and managing chronic conditions with intuitive eating and all of that. But first and foremost, I want you to just introduce yourself for folks that aren't familiar with who you are.
Yeah, so you gave a great introduction, but I am a registered dietitian and certified intuitive eating counselor as of a month ago. That was my 2020 goal.
Yay!
And, you know, despite all odds, we made it happen.
You did it.
My exam like 2 days before the end of the year, and, you know, pretty proud of myself for that.
That's amazing.
So yes, I went to the University of Iowa, like you said, and you did, and graduated with a degree in health promotion. And at the time, wasn't really sure what I wanted to do with that. And right around my junior year, realized I really loved nutrition. I know it's super cliche for a dietitian to say, but I'm a foodie.
Oh my gosh, another dietitian that I connected with, she's like, I know this is like
what everyone says, but I'm a dietitian and I love making food. I was like, really? Wouldn't guess that.
Yeah. No, I love food. Cooking is like my way to de-stress most of the time, unless I'm really busy and then I'm like, I can't be bothered to do but yeah, so I have always loved food. We could talk about that this way.
Just our love for food.
Yes. So I decided I wanted to go to the route of nutrition and was trying to figure out exactly how to make that happen. Realized I wanted to be a dietitian and then was told I would be disowned if I went to Iowa State for dietetics. So
makes sense.
So I decided that I really enjoyed public health and nutrition. So I got my Master of Public Health and Nutrition from the University of Minnesota in their coordinated program, where you do the master's as well as all the classes to finish up the degree to become a dietitian, and the internship into
oh my gosh,
the most intense 2 years of my life. I think I blacked out for most of it, but we did it. So yeah, I then, ended up staying in Minnesota. I first got a job working in corporate wellness and food service. So worked for a really large food service company, doing a lot of their programming in cafes, wellness presentations, all of that super fun stuff. But realized I really missed public health and really that policy system and environmental support of well-being, because I can't meet with everyone one-on-one as much as I would love to. And we also know that like environments and the systems we live in really impact our health.
Yes.
And so was feeling really called to return to that. So I do work in local public health in Minnesota on a grant that supports, increasing access to physical activity, fruits and vegetables, reducing tobacco, mental well-being, all of that really great stuff, doing some great work. And then I also have a private practice where I get to do the one-on-one piece of things. So I get to balance my two loves in nutrition. And I work with lots of folks who really want to improve relationship with food in their bodies, but have a chronic condition and aren't really sure how to manage that through nutrition and physical activity without getting into that really restrictive mindset. And so I could nerd out about that all day. So I'm super excited.
Oh my gosh, I'm going to let you here soon. I'm so excited to learn from you. Yeah.
Absolutely. No, it'll be great. But yeah, so that's kind of my professional background. But growing up was, super involved in sports, loved food, didn't really understand nutrition that much. I mean, my dad delivered bread for his job, so he was a route salesman, and my mom is a nurse practitioner. So I like to say I'm kind of the perfect combination of the two, with the and the medical
side. I can totally see that.
And so like kind of grew up around like, all different kinds of foods, really never feeling like there was restriction around food. I do attribute a lot of that to a lot of privileges that I you. So like class privilege, body size, all of that stuff made it so that growing up, I didn't have this really fraught relationship with food. And I feel like that's not the case for a lot of people who find their way into intuitive eating. I feel like lots of folks, including dietitians who end up, working with disordered eating or intuitive eating, things like that, have kind of a really intense personal experience with having a really poor relationship with food. And I will say there's been times where mine hasn't been the best, but I feel like I kind of sit in that gray area of like some, weird things around food, but nothing that would ever be a cause for concern, but it might cause some like personal strife and not be the best way to live your life. So I also really like operating in that space of intuitive eating as well. And so I think it's a really good combo.
Yeah, I love what you mentioned about how you said like you mentioned dietitians might have had like that conflicting or like combative relationship with food. And even I have found I mean, obviously I'm not a dietitian, but just being in this space, and even upon starting the podcast and even sharing more before I started the podcast, sharing more on my personal page, I think the norm is to like have a rocky relationship, like because of this is like society and diet culture in which we grow up in. And my sister was one of my first, well, she was my first guest on the podcast. And we always compare like her experience to mine. We grew up in very, same house, like very same situations. And yet she has never had that sort of relationship with food. And I always thought that like, oh man, I'm the weird one. Like, how come I'm struggling? And now I'm realizing that it's actually almost more weird to not have like a rocky relationship, which doesn't make it, I always say like, it doesn't make it necessarily a good thing or okay, but it just makes it's normalized, sadly.
Yeah. I think it really speaks to like the culture we have around food and wellness and all of that stuff. Because I mean, I've had the same experience with friends of mine who grew up in very similar households, or even like my brother growing up in the same household had, different pressures around food than I had. And so I think, it's really interesting to hear kind of the breadth of experiences, but I feel like at some point, most people do, at least anecdotally from like clients I've worked with and other professionals, like most people who kind of operate in fitness and nutrition and wellness have some sort of story like that, where there's been a point in time where they, haven't been as peaceful with food or their body or something like that, because there is so much pressure in this industry and
oh my gosh,
culturally in general.
Yeah. I'm curious how you found, like, did you know when you decided you wanted to become a dietitian and work like in regards to nutrition, did you always know that this was like the stance that you wanted to take, or was it more like the traditional? I mean, I know that there's a wide variety of the way people do nutrition counseling, but I'm curious if there was, a point in time when you're like, I think intuitive eating is the way to go, or what was that like for you?
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked this question. I had kind of a savior complex when I wanted to become a dietitian, honestly.
Yeah.
And felt like it was my role in the world was to, I even remember writing it in my personal statement for grad school, like to help solve the quote unquote obesity epidemic. That was the frame I was operating from. And so I went into grad school thinking, I like everything's going to be about weight management and reducing obesity risk, especially like from a public health level. Like a lot of our public health policy and programs that we do are really focused around weight. And as I was in grad school, started realizing like there is so much more that goes into this beyond individual choice. And I think that's kind of a lie that we've been fed by the culture is that every like how we look is all about individual choice. Our health is all about individual choice. And learning in grad school that like 30% of our health is determined by actual individual actions was completely mind-blowing to me, because as much as I kind of knew like, oh, it's important to, create these spaces where people, have access or feel comfortable doing things, I never really made the connection of how big some of the barriers are to being able to do that, but also learning at the same time that like health and the size of your body aren't as intricately connected as we tend to be told. And how, yes, there is some correlation with certain conditions and body size. There's no denying the science around that, but also some of those same conditions are found in smaller bodies. And it's way more about behavior than anything. And so, yes.
Snapping. Yes. Love it.
And I think that completely transformed the way I looked at approaching nutrition was, okay, it's not about how can I work with someone to shrink their body and that'll make them healthy. It's how can I coach someone to, be able to make some better decisions or make some decisions that are more supportive of their health, if that's what they want, because I can't force that on.
Yeah.
If that's what they want. But also, like, from a public health perspective, how can we make it easier for people to access that? Because a lot of it is about access and opportunity too. Is if you're working 3 jobs, when do you have time to cook? When do you have time to be active?
Yeah.
Or if you're on your feet all day, you're not going to then go for a run because it's not going to feel good. So I think I started kind of connecting all of these dots while I was in grad school, and right around the same time was like, oh, I'm going to get on Instagram and like, get started with that, because I wanted to share what I was learning, and just, you know, still maybe had a little bit of that savior complex I had before of like, I'm learning this, I should share it with everyone, maybe it'll help someone. And that's where I really started connecting with some like-minded dietitians and other professionals, and started learning a lot more about intuitive eating and health at every size, and some of the principles and concepts around that. And things just kept clicking. I was like, yes,
yes,
that's it. Like, that's what we need to be doing. Or that explains so much about like my experience working with clients as an intern, and, you know, seeing like, okay, we can make all these changes, but maybe your body size doesn't change, but all of your health markers are improving. So like, yeah, that was great. We should keep doing
that.
So yeah, I think there was just like kind of a lot of things that started happening at once that made me realize like, okay, this is a much more realistic approach to nutrition and well-being, and like, I'm on board with that, and that feels good to me and how I want to work with clients too.
So. I love that. I feel like too that because most registered dietitians, they don't go like a public health route, right? So I feel like that gives you just that kind of population-based perspective where you have to consider like the social determinants, you know, and all of that. So that's interesting.
Yeah, I think learning about social determinants of health was kind of the first thing that really flipped a switch in my brain. Is, you know, we're talking about financial access, transportation, food apartheid, food deserts. I mean, you're talking about all these factors that kind of layer on top of each other, and that impacts individual choice.
Right.
But also that like body size, like learning more about HAES and intuitive eating, like that body size isn't the be all end all of health, like we've been told. So yeah, diving into that research was super fun while I was in grad school.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I think too, like the individual choice that you've mentioned, that is, I mean, it's so harmful, and that's what we see. I think we see a lot of it on social media too, where it's like, it's your choice whether you get up in the morning and you work out, or it's your choice to either get the burger or the, you know, the salad, whatever. And I don't think that people even consider, you know, if everybody could have the option to make those choices, it would be one thing. But like you mentioned, if you're working 2 jobs, you don't even have the mental capacity to think about, you know, getting active, or much less finding time to like sit and manage your stress, you know, and how that impacts all of it.
Absolutely. Well, and I think that, like, to your point exactly, but then also kind of dovetailing off of it is, even if we all had the same access and all ate the same way and exercised the same way, we wouldn't look the same.
Yeah, like, we'd still look different.
We would not have 6-pack abs. Like, I think there's just some like unrealistic expectations about that, even when you have that personal choice, or the option to be able to do things of what that's going to do for you too.
Totally. Yeah, that's so true. I saw a post. It was, I don't know if it was back during Halloween, and I don't remember who it was, but it was like of 2 pumpkins side by side. And it's like, we were grown and nourished the same way, yet we totally, you know, the shapes of the pumpkins are totally different. And it was comparing to body size. You know, we can be fed the same, we can move the same, manage our stress the same, come from the same area, have the same family, and still, you know, have the same blood. We can be blood relatives, and we can still have totally different body sizes. So yeah, it's so interesting. So tell me more about like the intuitive eating and chronic disease management. I don't even know like a question to pull out of that, but I am so intrigued by this because similar to how you kind of found your way towards intuitive eating, my first job out of college I was an alcohol educator, but then my first one, like in regards to health and fitness, I was a corporate wellness coach. And I just remember I was meeting with folks who like, did their health screening. Some of them came back all green, beautiful. Your BMI is lovely, which now I'm like, I roll, like your blood looks great. Your blood pressure is good. And then some of them they were trying to manage chronic conditions. And looking back now, I ended up leaving that job because I was like, I am not equipped to work with people with chronic conditions. But even then I remember that they were feeding me guidelines of, how many carbs that these folks should be eating and all of these things. And I was just so overwhelmed by it. And I think of now that I know about intuitive eating, I think of how much beneficial it probably could have been for them. But so I'm just so curious, like how those two intersect and how you work with chronic disease management in terms of intuitive eating.
Yeah, so it really does sometimes depend on the condition we're talking about, but in general, when we're looking at managing chronic conditions while also focusing on intuitive eating, a lot of it comes down to mindset and intent. And so I work a lot with clients on some of those principles of rejecting the diet mentality. Like, this is not a 30-day cleanse, quick fix. Like, we're working on habits that are going to support you and the management of your chronic disease for the rest of your life. Like this, we want this to be as least stressful as, I don't even know how to say that.
That's right. Least stress.
Least stressful.
I nodded my head. I was like, yeah, that's right. Didn't even question it.
We want it to be as least stressful and as fun. I'm big about making nutrition fun. I know that's really nerdy, but like, why do something if you're not going to enjoy it? I guess sometimes we have to be adults and we're not going to enjoy anything, but food is like, you interact with food minimum 3 times a day. So like, let's make it enjoyable.
I'm the same way with fitness. And anytime I meet with someone and my first question is like, so what do you enjoy doing? They're always, especially when I'm meeting with students, they're like, look at me like, what the hell? Why does it matter what I enjoy doing? Like, just get me to reach my goal. And it's just so funny when they do not expect like enjoyment or fun to be part of the process. And then it's like 75% of the process.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. My intake questionnaire is, what are your favorite foods? And that's one of the questions on it. And people are always like, I don't know. I'm like, see, you need to have an answer.
Yes. Or they're probably like, my favorite foods, I can't eat them anymore. Like that kind of mentality. So yeah,
absolutely. But anyways, so really working on kind of reducing that restrictive mindset, because obviously we know, to manage certain chronic conditions, like there are nutrition therapies that can be supportive of that. And so how can we make it not feel restrictive and make it a more positive experience? Still let you enjoy the foods you love. Still let you participate. I mean, a lot of our social gatherings are around food. So how can we make sure that you're still able to participate in life with your condition? So we honestly work through all the same principles. And I find sometimes, depending on the person, and nutrition is so individualized. As a health coach, I'm sure everything is very individualized. I find some people need a little bit more work on the mindset side of things before we can even dive into here are the nutrition interventions that are going to be supportive for your health. And so we're really working on that, making peace with food, like quieting that food police voice in your head, because we don't want these health promoting behaviors to feel like rules. We don't want them to feel negative. Because that just creates more stress, which impacts your chronic condition.
Right.
Like stress is I feel like I talk about sleep and stress more than nutrition sometimes.
Oh yeah. I'm the same way with exercise. Like I totally get that.
Yeah. And so then we can kind of move into like the more typical things you think of with intuitive eating, honoring hunger and fullness, things like that. But really, we're looking, gentle nutrition is part of intuitive eating. Nutrition is not left off of the intuitive eating principles. It's a huge and important piece of it, but sometimes we have to do the work to get there first to make sure it's not becoming restrictive in rules. And so when we can get to that point, my focus is always let's look at what we can add rather than subtract whenever possible. So how can we make our plate a little bit more balanced if we're worried about blood sugars? How can we try and reduce some of those spikes we might be having throughout the day? If you do have a food allergy or intolerance like celiac disease, how can we make sure you're still eating foods you enjoy or fun foods that you feel like are completely off limits to you now? And so I think it really is about how we're approaching that from like a mindset side of things. And I feel like it sometimes takes a little bit more work than we think. Because a lot of people come to me and they're like, okay, tell me what I can't eat. I'm like, that's not what I'm here for. I'm here to tell you what you can eat and how we can make the things you want to eat work with your new lifestyle, because it's sometimes a really big change for folks, depending on the condition they have.
Yeah. And I can see how they would be like, wait, what way are we going to do this? Because that's almost I love the route you take. And it's almost like counter to what they might see a lot of times when they go to a physician, or again, even when they would come to me for health coaching when I was new, they would just be like, give me the numbers that I need to hit, or things like that. And again, that was before I was into intuitive eating, but it's almost counter to the things that we think of. Typically it's like, just do the thing, do it for a few weeks, habit will set in, it'll be easy. And so I love that you focus on like the motivation or the mindset piece before, or you mentioned the intention beforehand.
Yeah. I do a lot of motivational interviewing with clients. And we really dig deep into the why. Like, why do you want to make this change? Or why do you feel like it's important for you to manage your condition? Because, it's, you have bodily autonomy. If you don't want to, do those things, that's totally up to you. I'm here to support you if that's what you want to do. So let's dig into the motivation of why. And I think a lot of people initially come in with, well, my, doctor told me I have to lose weight to manage my condition, or I have to do keto.
Oh gosh, yeah.
The number of times I get keto these days. I have to do, XYZ, big, huge change. Like, help me do that. And I'm like, okay, I get that. Like, that's the perspective you're coming from because they're telling you that. But like, why do you feel like you want to make a change, or why do you think that's important? And I laugh because I ask it about 5 times. And I'm like, no, let's dig deeper. What's your why? What's your why? And it's often not about like the soul, like losing weight or managing a condition or whatever. It's more so like, I want to be able to run around with my kids. I want to be around for as long as I can. And I'm like, okay, let's use that as our motivation, because that's so much more powerful because it's intrinsic, it's inside of you, but also it's so much more positive than feeling like, you're failing if you don't hit a certain number or follow certain rules. Like, how can we shift your motivation to be more positive so that these changes that we do have to make, don't feel like the end of the world to you. Like, you can still participate and enjoy your life.
Do you ever run into anybody who's like, I have no internal reason why I want to do this. I'm only doing it for, like, any total pre-contemplators where they're like, I'm totally just trying to make my wife happy? Or do you ever run into those people? I guess when they come to meet with you, it's probably more voluntary. So I would assume,
I tend not to have as many people who are kind of contemplating or like pre-contemplation change. I tend to have people who are pretty ready to make changes, but the motivation or the mindset they have around it is pretty negative and like like feeling guilty and self-defeated and all of that. And so while we can kind of jump to that like movement, and I do sometimes do that right away with some people because I'm all about meeting people where they're at.
Right, totally.
And so if someone is like, well, I need to know what to eat, that's like the most important thing. We'll talk about like, okay, how do we add things to your plate? How do we, try and balance blood sugar? How do, all those things that we can do with nutrition. But then you start, sneaking in the like, one meal, one day, 1 week of eating isn't going to make or break your health. And like, just kind of starting that process of like, how can we have this be less black and white and less restrictive, slowly but surely, because I know not everyone is on board, with intuitive eating right away. It's a big, scary thing. So how can we start introducing some of these principles in a way that feels good for that person? And then that's where I get to push them a little bit more. It's like, yes, I can coach you around nutrition and eating more vegetables and yada. Yeah. like let's push some of these other pieces a little bit more, because it's going to end up doing you so much more benefit in the long run. When you can have those larger shifts. So.
I love that you totally do meet your clients where you're at. Like the fact that you're like, they don't even know that what I'm doing is intuitive eating right away. And then you just like subtly slide in those like anti-diet culture cues. I love that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm definitely, not to say I'm not about informed consent.
Oh yeah.
So like, I definitely let people know like, hey, this is an approach that could maybe help you feel less guilty about your food choices. Like, what do you think about starting to incorporate some of this in? If I am going to go like really hardcore intuitive eating with folks, or I feel they need that, definitely let them know. But any other time, like getting some of those messages in there, just because I feel like people don't hear it from anywhere else. That like, it's okay to like food. That's one I get all the time is people are like, I feel bad for liking food. I'm like, I love food.
Yes.
And so being able to kind of not sneak, but like get some of those messages that kind of take the pressure off. I feel like there is so much pressure around it, especially if you have a chronic disease, because a lot of that is seen as individual responsibility, when in many cases, genetics play a really big role, the environment you grew up in, all of that. And I talk about that a lot with folks too, because I think there is a lot of stigma around chronic disease and individual responsibility. Yeah.
I just feel like it's the idea of intuitive eating, it's like still so nuanced to so many people, or it just is so not against, but again, like I mentioned, counter to what they're used to. It's like, even if it can be so, you ran this many miles. What about ways, what other progress points did you make that have nothing to do with numbers maybe? Or again, if they are still measuring based on pant size or things like that, like you said, the word sneak is like, but it is kind of just like, it's like another touch point for them, or almost like like an introduction. And it's like the more introductions they can have to it, the more it'll start to help shift their mindset, and like that motivation piece that you mentioned.
Yeah, subtly bringing it into their into content. And like I talk about
dropping hints.
Yes, dropping hints.
So I think I read on your website, or maybe it was just in your introduction, like I love the idea of keep it simple. And you've mentioned a couple of times, like the adding things versus subtracting things. So in your head, when you think about like keeping it simple, like keeping nutrition simple, or just even wellness simple, tell me more about like what that means for you and your work with clients.
Yeah. I think there's so much noise out there about nutrition and wellness and what you need to do to be healthy, that it really is. I mean, this is why I love intuitive eating, is it's really about finding what works best for you as an individual, because like we talked about, it is so individualized. And so really a lot of the messages we're seeing on social media, like it may work for someone, usually in the short term.
Yes.
But like you have to find something that's going to work for you for the rest of your life. And so I find we have so much else to worry about in life, between jobs, relationships, family, the state of the world, that nutrition shouldn't really be one of those things. Like when you clear out the headspace that thinking about food takes up, I mean, imagine, how much time you spend, or maybe if you have more disordered behaviors, how much time you spend thinking about food. What would you do with the extra 30 minutes, hour,
that is so
if that's
true.
what it adds up to? Like, what would you be able to accomplish with that time? And so I really focus on simplifying, and because I work with a lot of folks who are so busy and managing multiple schedules that like we have to make it as easy as possible on ourselves. And it really is focusing on, like I've mentioned already, focusing on what you can add and what's reasonable and doable for you. And especially when we're making changes, how can we take those really small steps at just tweaking what we're doing to give us some benefit? So whether it's making sure you add a vegetable to your meal, like that's a really easy fix. You can still eat the things that you want to eat, but we're also getting in that extra fiber, the micronutrients, all of that good stuff from those veggies. And most of us could stand to probably eat more of that. We all know that. Like we all know vegetables are good for us. And so fruits and vegetables, whole grain, all of that stuff. We know, most of us know nutrition. It's not an issue of education. It's an issue of implementation. And so making it as easy as possible is the key to changing anything. And so I really work with clients a lot on like balancing our plate. So do we have, I call it the flexible 5.
Ooh, I'm pumped for this.
Yes. Do we have these 5 things on our plate? A source of protein, a source of carbohydrate, a source of fiber, usually fruits and vegetables, a source of healthy fat, and then my favorite, the satisfaction factor.
Dessert,
yes.
Or whatever's satisfying for you.
For you, it's dessert. For me, it's really dessert too. But are we, that's where we kind of pay attention to what our body is telling us. Like, do I want something crunchy? Do I want something salty? Do I want something sweet? Do I want something saucy? Do I want something cold, hot? All these different descriptors we can use for food. Do I want a big meal? Am I in the mood for something smaller or a snack? Like that, those all kind of go into that satisfaction piece. And they mention it in the intuitive eating book, that satisfaction is really like the hub of everything. And so we are, by human nature, we seek things that satisfy us. And if we don't have satisfaction, we're going to keep looking for it. And so that's, when we talk about honoring cravings, things like that, like that's the key, is we want to make sure we're doing that. And I think that applies to life as well. Like
so true. That is so true. I love one thing that I made a mental note of while you were saying, I love the fact of keep it simple, because you were talking about like stress and even just like the state of the world today. We do not need to be expelling any extra mental energy.
Nope.
Thinking about food, more than a normal amount, whatever that quote unquote normal is. Like that, even when you said that, I was like, wow. In fact, I'm like, I can't wait to put it on a Canva graphic and post it on my Instagram. That's like how I see your words come to life in my mind. I'm like, wow, that's going to be a really good quote on Instagram.
I've always wanted to be a Canva Instagram quote.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. Oh, I just love the way you think about it. And even, what did you call it? Not the Fab 5. That's Queer Eye. What was it?
The Flexible 5. Because when we're talking about intuitive eating, it's all about being flexible. And I mentioned it before, but one meal isn't going to make or break your health. And so it's not necessarily at every meal that we need to have all 5 of those things. Not every meal is going to have vegetables. Not every meal is going to be the most satisfying experience of your life. But like, if we can most of the time aim for these things, we don't do black and white. So most of the time, if we can do these things, like that's going to be what supports our health. And I really like emphasizing the flexibility piece, because I think that gives us that permission to do what works for us and to not feel guilty about it, because that guilt And that stress and that shame is so much worse for your health.
Right.
Compiled with everything else going on in the world, just continuing to add to that. So I think, the really promoting flexibility with clients and how can we make our thinking more flexible, our food choices more flexible, because we know that that's an important part of honoring our health too.
Right. And I remember when I learned about the satisfaction factor and how that was like the hub of a wheel. Like I can see it in the intuitive eating book.
Yeah.
I remember just thinking like, wow, I wasn't expecting that. Like even in the state that like the mindset that I was in at the time, it really threw me for a loop. And then the more I got into like learning about diet culture, I realized that like diet culture literally strips the joy out of eating. And I think I've said it. Yeah, snap it. I love the snaps. I think I've said it like 4 other episodes, and I think people, I probably heard it from somebody else who said it, but like eating is such an enjoyable experience. Like you've mentioned, you said, so many social gatherings are around food, maybe not necessarily now, but we think about holidays and all of that. And I think when I made that connection, I was like, wow, I am supposed to like food. I'm supposed to enjoy food, despite the fact that, didn't know it at the time to call it diet culture, but that diet culture tells us not to, that like food is the enemy, that it is what's keeping us from reaching our goals and all of this. And so now when I think about, the satisfaction is such an important piece. It's just, I want more people to be able to know that and embrace it, and feel okay for loving food.
Yeah, I know. I wish I could that's what I want to give everyone is like, liking food is okay.
Yes.
And I think I used to feel so much shame around that because you weren't supposed to love food. Like food was this dangerous, like tempting, deceitful thing. And it's like, no, it's meant to be. If it wasn't satisfying to eat, we would not have made it this far as a species.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. If we didn't enjoy it, we wouldn't have done it. So
yes.
I think there's like a whole culture around, not even just food satisfaction, but like sometimes around like satisfaction and enjoyment in general. Like we have such a hustle culture and kind of a punishment focused or like willpower focused around everything.
Yes.
And it's seeped into food, and like food's supposed to be enjoyable.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been meant to be enjoyed since we started walking the earth. And so it makes sense that, that's the hub of kind of our eating experience to me. I don't know. Yeah,
I think that's so true. And the fact that it, like you've mentioned, that's what we're all looking for. This is going to get really deep now. That's what we're all looking for in life, right? It's like satisfaction. And that is, I've never thought of it in terms of like thinking about, the broader life in general, but it makes a lot of sense. If we're seeking satisfaction in all that we do, why leave out food? Like why forget about food, which is the thing that like sustains us and gives us energy to do all of our favorite things. I love that. I love the keep it simple, adding, not subtracting, and the way that you incorporate intuitive eating into like the chronic disease management. You are just a joy. It is so fun. I'm so glad that, that however I found you on Instagram that I did, because I just feel like I love the content that you post. I love even this conversation now, like learning more about you and hearing you talk about your work with clients. It makes me really excited.
Well, really thank you. Yeah, no, I'm really glad we were able to connect. Like I said, I could talk about this all day.
I know. I'm probably going to have to have you back. Like I try to keep my episodes like somewhat like less than an hour. Yeah. I'm like, I'm going to have all these guests back. Like I have more questions for them.
Yeah. I mean, anytime you just let me know.
Yes. So before I let you go, tell listeners where they can find you.
Yeah, so I am on Instagram. I took a little bit of a break from posting, if I'm being honest. with everything.
Good for you.
Yes, I needed a little social media break, but going to be picking up there again. So I'm at Sam_the_dietitian on Instagram. The other Sam the dietitian without the underscores is great. She's also an intuitive eating dietitian. So I don't fault her for taking my Instagram username.
That's so funny.
And then I also have a website, livemindfullywell.com. So Mindfully Well is my private practice, and happy to connect in either of those places.
Yes, I love that. One last thing. If kind of two parts to it, or you can combine them into one. First of all, is there anything that we didn't talk about that you think would be helpful to, and or if you could leave listeners with like one nugget of information, what would it be? I know pressure's on. I didn't put this on the outline. This is like throwing you for a loop here.
What's that? Hopefully I say something smart. Let's see. I think I would say my biggest piece of advice when it comes to healing your relationship with food and starting intuitive eating, especially with a chronic condition, is to be nice to yourself. I think many of us have these voices in our head that are pretty negative. And am I allowed to swear?
Oh yeah, you can drop F-bombs, any kind of, yeah.
I had to ask that before we started. I worked in kitchens when I was a food service and dietitian, so I swear like a sailor.
Oh, me too. Wow, this is perfect. You're definitely gonna have to come back on just so we can like drop a bunch of F-bombs.
Okay. Anyways, I think we all have these really negative voices in our heads, constantly judging us, what in intuitive eating we call the food police. I tell my clients we have these little assholes in our heads, and we can be really mean to ourselves. And so I think a really good first step in this process is to look at how you talk to yourself. And I think that's a lot of the work we do when it comes to intuitive eating as well, is how can we be a little bit kinder to ourselves, and how can we extend the same grace that we extend to other people to ourselves. And I think it's really helpful to ask, would I say this to my friend? Or if I had this question or was thinking this way, what would I say to a person that I really care about? And then say that to yourself. And sometimes you say it out loud to yourself because it has a little bit more impact that way. So yeah, I think my parting words would be, don't be a dick to yourself.
Yes. Oh my gosh. That is so perfect. And talk about how, again, you mentioned the food police and how when it comes to food, again, there's a lot of little assholes in our heads, but even just in every aspect of our life. I mean, yes, Absolutely. It's easier said than done, but if we can just start to notice it, notice when our inner asshole is acting up, like, that is so powerful.
Tell it to shut up.
Yes, tell it to like, you're in the doghouse, like, get out of here. Yes.
Yes. And the first step is bringing awareness to it. So if you can just start noticing how you talk to yourself, that's a really great first step, even if you're not in the place to talk back to yourself yet. But then, can we slowly start working towards, coming up with some responses to yourself? You can be nice to that voice in your head. I have been rude to that voice in my head before when I tell it to shut up. But I think it's an important practice. And I think it spills over into kind of like you were talking about. It's not just, the assholes aren't just about nutrition or wellness or any of that. Like we put so much pressure on ourselves, and that voice is constantly in our head. So I find that if we can start quieting that voice in one area of our life, and sometimes food's an easier area to start with, then it really spills over into everything else. So intuitive eating, yes, is about, wellness and nutrition, But I have seen clients who have had it really make some big changes in other areas of their life too. So benefits beyond that.
So true. Absolutely true. I know I've experienced that for myself in my relationship with, food and movement and just my body in general. And I've seen it, with students, and just so many examples of how it is intuitive eating, but it's more like intuitive living. They need to rebrand that shit. Like intuitive living. That's
I love it.
That's going to be like the next trending hashtag, intuitive living. Someone's going to hear this and just take it over. I don't know if I'm equipped for that. Oh, that's funny. Well, thank you so much, Sam. I'm seriously so pumped that we were able to connect, and that you were able to share all of this goodness with both myself and all those that listen to this podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure.
Thanks again, everybody, for tuning in to another episode of Give 'em the Bird. If you haven't yet, be sure to go give Sam a follow on Instagram to stay up to date with all she's doing. If you're enjoying this podcast, feel free to rate, review, and subscribe. I will see you back here in 2 weeks for another episode. But in the meantime, go give 'em the bird.